On the
Oh,
screen.
there we go. Now, can you hear us now? Sorry, we had to, we're having technical difficulties this morning. All right. We should be ready to roll now. Thank you for being patient while we worked out a couple of things here. We're still getting used to the new conference rooms in our office building. So a little bit of work to get that all straightened out. So we have quite a few things to go through today. I know everybody's super excited to talk about property tax authority. That will be towards the end. I'll talk about that, but just kind of to go over introductions. I'm Bryce Wilson, the finance officer for the Department of Education. We have with us a state auditor, Jeff Schreier, who is going to go through some of the budget stuff for you to start out with. Michelle Cartwright and Stephanie DeGroat are here as well. And then Kevin Lyons is going to go over a couple of things related to state aid as well today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeff Schreier, who's going to get us kicked off here this morning. We are recording this and we'll put it out. And if you want to go back and enjoy this presentation many times, it will be available out on the webinar, the school finance webinar website on the school finance homepage. And we'll get that out there just as soon as we can. So again, if you have questions as we go through this, please just type them into the chat and we will try and follow up with those as quick as possible. If we miss them, we'll go back through and catch them at some point. So go ahead, Jeff.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We can go ahead and advance the slides. So I think my, let me go back one. There we go. My part of it, I think, is going to be pretty quick today. Like Bryce said, that property tax request authority is probably the biggest thing. And luckily, I don't have to deal with that too much. So just to kind of start off with, really, the forms were released and put out on our website last Friday. So if anybody has not gone out and got those yet, they are available. Shouldn't see any major changes to those forms this year. The new property tax request authority deal will all be handled through the LC2, so you won't see anything on the budget forms for that. And just a reminder, the key date with the budget process is September 30th. So that was updated last year and remains the same again this year. So September 30th is when budgets and that interlocal agreement report is due to our office. And then again, LB 243 and 727 are the two main bills this year that we'll talk about. Go ahead to the next slide. Just to get started here, budget submission to the state auditor's office. Just a reminder for everybody, those budgets, once they're completed, go to the county clerks, to the state auditor, and to Department of Education. For submitting to the state auditor's office, our preferred method would be to submit online through our website, but we do still allow them to be mailed in. If anybody wants to mail in hard copies, that would be allowed as well. But otherwise, that process would remain the same from last year. You would submit them in the same place on our website as in the past. Go to the next slide here. LB 727, just wanted to touch on this a little bit. Had some changes related to these joint public hearings that started last year. So just preface this by saying these changes we're talking about, the first thing it would be that you have to, or you would need to be required to participate in the first place. So if you guys do your budget and your tax request is within the allowable growth percentage, basically none of this would matter because you wouldn't be attending the joint public hearing in the first place. I think we might have advanced one slide, X. There we go. So again, have a few updates we'll talk about here. These sections of LB 727 did have an emergency clause, so they will be in effect for the 23-24 budgets that we're working on right now in this fall. So you can go ahead, next slide. So start off here. First change is that we need to have at least one elected official from each participating political subdivision attend the joint public hearing. So you guys might remember last year, we just had to send a designated representative, but that person did not necessarily have to be an elected official. So starting with the joint public hearings this fall, we have to send at least one basically member of the school board to attend the joint public hearing. That elected official could also be the designated representative for your school, but they don't have to be. So you could send somebody from the school board and send somebody else to be the representative that does the presentation and talks about the budget. So that's kind of up to each subdivision. If the elected official is knowledgeable and can answer questions about the budget, they could be the only person that goes, or there could be others that go as well. The other item that came up a lot last year was concerns regarding Open Meetings Act. If we send the full school board or county board or whatever, there are concerns about that if we would have problems with the Open Meetings Act. So LB 727 has a section in there that says that the presence of a quorum or the participation of elected officials at the joint public hearing does not constitute a meeting. So if the full school board wants to go to the joint public hearing, you can, and you don't have to worry about Open Meetings Act problems. Also change the dates. So these joint hearings are now held September 14th through the 23rd. I think last year it was the 17th through the 28th. So that was another concern that was brought up a lot last year, is if we have our joint public hearing on the 28th, that really doesn't give us much time to get that final budget in to the county and state auditor's office by September 30th. So the senators moved that up to September 14th through 23rd, and then it still the hearing needs to be held before the budget is filed with the state auditor's office. And the way they got those few extra days to move those hearings up is by changing it so that the information for the postcard and in those publications goes to the county assessor electronically now, rather than the county clerk like we did last year. So you might remember last year, if you had to participate in the joint public hearing, you gave your information to the county clerk. The county clerk then had 5 days to forward that information on to the county assessor, and kind of realized there's really no point to involve the county clerk in that process. And if we just give the information directly to the county assessor, we can cut out that 5 days. So that's kind of how we were able to move those dates up a little bit. It does say that the information for the joint public hearing is provided electronically to the county assessor. I have not heard what exactly that process looks like. So I think you'll just have to work with your county assessor regarding how they want that information provided to them. Also says that the website of each participating political subdivision needs to have a link to their proposed budget. Smaller counties and smaller cities are excluded from that. And then also for this year, for the joint public hearings prior to January 1st of 2024, school districts are also excluded from that. So basically this year, schools don't need to have that link to the proposed budget on your website, but assuming no changes for next year, you would need to have that proposed budget available. Right. Other big thing for school districts is that the definition of property tax request was updated to exclude school district bond taxes. So in other words, if your school district is increasing your tax request and that increase is because of your bond fund tax request, that increase doesn't count against the allowable growth percentage. So if your non-bond tax request stays exactly the same, but your bond tax request increases 20%, that wouldn't trigger you to attend the joint public hearing, because those bonds are excluded from the definition of property tax request. So that is just specific to schools. If any of you talk to the counties or cities or community colleges, they don't have any similar exclusion. That's just for school districts. So that is a difference between you guys and everybody else. Right. Just touch on this real brief. I know Bryce said he would talk about this a lot more. Basically, starting this year, Department of Education calculates property tax request authority, and whatever that number is the maximum property tax request that can be included in your budget. And like I mentioned at the beginning, all that will be handled through LC2. So you won't see anything on the forms for that new process. All right. Just kind of that's all the new legislation. So these next few slides are just some reminders, really no changes here. Common question that comes up is what happens if the adopted budget is different than what we originally published in the newspaper for our budget hearing notice? And statute 13506 says if any of those numbers change, then we would need to publish a summary of changes within 20 days after the budget is adopted. So if the school board wants to make a change when they adopt the final budget, we would need to publish notice of that change within 20 days.
Jeff, we got a question.
Yeah.
Is the joint public hearing supposed to be a Q&A or just a one-sided presentation from the school district?
That's a good question. The statutes say that the designated representative for each subdivision needs to make a presentation. And the statute outlines specific things that need to be included in that presentation. I can't say that the statute specifically requires a Q&A, but I believe it does say that if anybody wants to address the representatives, that they have to be provided a reasonable amount of time to do so.
That's been what we've said is, I think there was intended to allow for public comment.
Right.
It doesn't there's nothing that says it has to be a Q&A required. Some counties ran it as a Q&A, which I think was maybe uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But that would be a county
Specific.
how a county's running it, not anything that's required.
Right. Yep. The other thing I'll mention about those joint public hearings is the impression I got from the senators is they were very happy with how they turned out. They thought they were really good. And so I don't foresee them going away anytime soon, unfortunately. So last thing here, just some common issues that we see. Do you have another question for this?
Yeah. Question, can you cover when budgets need to be on the website for school districts again?
So this year, school districts are excluded. So you don't have to have them on there at all. Starting next year, well, the first question is, do you have to attend the joint public hearing or not? If you don't, then there's no requirement to have it on the website. If you do have to attend the joint public hearing, there's no time frame of when it has to be on the website. So what I've been telling people is as soon as possible I think the intent there is to have it available for people to look at before the joint public hearing. So my recommendation has been as soon as possible, but there's nothing, at least as far as the statutes go, that say when it has to be on the website.
I've been telling school districts it's not a bad idea to early implement that and go ahead and put it out on your website this year. I think it just is more transparent.
Yep.
And doesn't hurt anything anyways. The unfortunate part of the joint public hearings is the special hearing notice was probably the best information that was put out, and that's no longer required if you're part of the joint public hearing. So I think that's a good piece you can put on your website if nothing else.
Right. Yep. Just some common issues that we see when our office goes through those budgets and does our budget review. The biggest thing is just not getting everything that's required to be submitted. So for our office specifically, since we don't have the access to the LC2, we just ask that you kind of print that out and include that in your submission to the state auditor's office. If you have any special grant funds, include that special grant funds list, your school board minutes where they approve the budget, your proof of publication for where those hearing notices were published, the budget hearing notice, and then your valuation certification from the county assessor. And the other big thing is beginning balances don't agree to prior year ending balances or to the audit report or to the AFR.
I got a question on that one, Jeff.
Yeah.
So as the auditor's office, do you look and see, so we have a lot of times where there's a difference between the audit report and the ending prior year's budget that you would be your starting point. As the auditor's office, do you guys look at both? We've told school districts, if you're going to match it to your audit and it's different than the budget, just put a note in there that, hey, we matched our audit. Do you look at both automatically? Do they need that note?
Yeah. So basically, if our starting point would be comparing this year's balance to last year's budget. If that doesn't agree, typically we would go to the audit. If we can tie it out to the audit, we're good. We might go to the AFR, but normally AFR and the audit should match. So you don't necessarily need to include the no. It certainly doesn't hurt, but our next step would always, if they don't match, we would always go to the audit and see.
So I guess to me, it makes sense if they may get off at some point, whether they had a change or something like that amendment. There could be a lot of different things.
Right.
It feels like probably the best place to work off of is the audit in a lot of cases, because then you have a good starting point and you'll move forward. It should be correct.
Yep, I would agree. Don't match last year's budget if last year's budget is wrong. If it's wrong and we figured out we had an error somewhere and fix it for the audit, go based off of the audit.
I've switched. I used to tell districts use last year's budget, and I've switched and said use the audit, better source of a starting balance for that actual year.
Yep. I think that's, okay, a few more things here. Budget amendments, we're getting somewhat closer here to the end of the fiscal year, a couple months left, I suppose. Just some reminders here. If you are going to have any fund that goes over budget, you want to make sure you go through the budget amendment process. And that amendment is approved by the school board before the end of the fiscal year. Once that amendment's done, it needs to be filed with the state auditor's office, county clerks, and Department of Education. We do have some examples and instructions on our website of what that process looks like, but basically it's pretty much the same thing you go through to adopt the budget of publishing notice, holding a hearing, and then having the school board adopt the amended budget.
And I'll plug the budget text. It's also in the budget text as well for school districts if you need a reference another place.
At least as far as our office goes, I'm not sure what NDE wants. I suppose they can answer that part of it, but at least as far as our office goes, we only need the pages of the budget that changed. So we don't need the whole package all over again, just a few pages that changed. The minutes where the amendment was approved, and then the publication for that amendment hearing would be the kind of the three things we need for those amendments. All right. I think this is the last one. Audit reports, just want to touch on this briefly. Again, no real changes here. Hopefully everybody knows those are due by November 5th. Same process for submitting them to our office. Preferred method would be online through our website, or you can still mail in the hard copy of those audit reports. We do have the authority. We had the statutes updated a couple of years here. If anybody does not get their audit report into us by November 5th, we would have the authority to assess a $20 per day late fee, starting basically the day it becomes delinquent. It says we may assess that fee, so we don't necessarily have to. And quite frankly, we don't want to, because it just makes more work for us to kind of the administrative work to assess that fee and follow up, getting people to pay and whatnot. And so I think the main thing here is if something happens, something comes up and that audit is not going to be done and into us by November 5th, just call us and let us know what's going on. As long as there's kind of open communication and there's reasonable reasons why the audit's late, most likely we aren't going to assess the late fee. But if we don't hear from you and the only reason it's late is because you blew off the audit, you weren't responding to your auditor, you didn't have an auditor hired, that would be where we might start thinking about assessing that late fee. But otherwise, as long as you guys are trying and doing your best to get it done on time, that would be the key thing there. I think that is all of my slides. Yep. So I don't know if there's any other questions for me.
Any questions for Jeff? I think Jeff's has to run here. So if you have any more questions for him, we'll give you a minute or so here before we roll on. And I guess if there are other questions that come up for Jeff or that we can't answer later, we can make sure that we get answers for those too. So just send us an email with those questions or his contact information. All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Right.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Cartwright, and Stephanie DeGroat sitting next to me. We are going to give a presentation on the district budget and the LC2. we're gonna kind of tag team it a little bit, and try to make it all come together. All right, so obviously you need all the information to get your budget started. On our school finance website, we have a page dedicated to all things budget. All the links are there. You should be seeing those now if you were to go out there. Basically everything you need to know. And also we've added that link to the APA's office for your convenience. Your friend right there is that budget timeline to keep you on task of all the due dates and deadlines that need to be followed to get your budget and all supporting documents to where they need to go and at the appropriate time. And at the bottom is that web address for you. All right, so there you're going to find the budget text. Bryce did mention it. It's the document that NDE puts out. It's going to give you the explanation of all the budgeting terms you're going to come across. It reviews all the taxing funds and those allowed levies. Talks about assessing unused budget authority, explains levy expenditure exclusions, then also procedures for holding the special hearing, the special elections for levy override or your budget authority. Again, web address at the bottom. Then I just want to show a copy of the APA's office budget instruction manual, more in depth on the budget form itself. If there's updates to statute, they do a great job of stating those. We do as well. And again, updated each year to incorporate the legislative changes. So you're getting ready to work on your budget. Obviously, important thing is knowing how much your certified budget authority is. We certify that on or before March 1st of each year per statute. This year, we did recertify that on July 9th due to some legislature changes and some corrections. To give you more in-depth explanation of the information on that page, you can go to NDE's budget text document, page 2, gives you the full explanation of how your budget was calculated, if you're budget-based, student growth, or formula-based. You'll see on the document your certified budget authority, your allowable reserve percentage, access to prior year unused budget authority. Those things do pre-populate into the LC2, so you don't have to do anything with those. It's just a guidance, again, that's released early on in the year so you can start your budget planning. So if you were up against that budget authority, there's provisions in state statute that allow specific items to be outside of the general fund expenditure limitation. You can utilize those exclusions. Stephanie's going to talk about all the exclusions a little bit later, but there's just some bullet points to remind you what those are. So special grant funds, properly estimate your sped expenses, and then those general fund and lit exclusions you're going to see on Schedule A. Then if you like to do some more paperwork and hold more meetings, then you always could go to a public vote to exceed your budget authority. And there's some information there that you would need to provide to us and steps you need to go through. So on the certified document, you saw the total allowable reserves, and that is for the fund, the depreciation fund total requirements, the employee benefit fund, and general fund necessary cash reserve. It's a budgeting tool to help with cash flow. It's not cash in the bank, so to speak, that you'd be keeping track of, but again, a budgeting tool to help increase your cash flow. It's an amount that's entered into your budget worksheet. So for those 3 funds, the totals, appropriate totals, would auto-populate and calculate into the LC2. The LC2 makes sure that you do not exceed that allowable amount. So the calculation of that total allowable reserve is the total amount of your general fund budget times that allowable reserve percentage that you've seen on your certified budget document, and it comes up with that amount. So again, the amounts from those 3 funds would not be able to exceed that $2.2 million. Again, if you would like some more explanation, go back to that budget text and then go to the allowable reserve limitation page and it'll explain more for you. So just a couple updates on the budget form. So we're going to go into that right now that I wanted to note for you. So Jeff did speak about that they're no longer the principal and interest on the bonds would be included. So there is an extra line here that you're going to have to go to your prior year's budget, which would be the easiest to pick up that number. So it does tell you to go to the cover page in the all purposes column and pick up that total and list that here. So that's a new line on this page that you'll need to enter. Get started on your budget. You can enter estimated valuations and then update later in August when you get your certified. The information from this page filters to other worksheets. So you want to make sure that when you get those final numbers that you want to go back here and enter those correct amounts so that all of your worksheets are corrected. Just a little note on the PT request form. Again, the first arrow there, you're seeing where it says non-bond property tax request. So that's filtering from the information that's entered on the cover page, or that's populated on the cover page. Again, you still need to double check if you have to have that joint public hearing. At the bottom, that box auto calculates and shows you, you'll see the NOT for not, and then must if you should have one. And then if a joint public hearing is required, there's that new date of September 4th of notifying your county assessor, not the county clerk. All right, next page we're going to talk about is your budget forms. In the budget forms is all of the fund worksheets. So there's 11 worksheets for the funds, 11 funds. So you're going to enter, first column is going to be enter your audit information or your AFR from the 21-22 information. Middle column is current year data plus the estimate to complete the year. So make sure you do your best to calculate that. So you got a good base to move forward to work on column 3, which is your planned budget. You can get started now. I've talked to quite a few superintendents already gathering their information and working on the document. The new document has been released on the APACE office. So if you were using the prior year, make sure you do go out and grab that new one and then copy and paste your information into that. All information that is needed in the LC2 is grabbed from the budget forms. So the information does the information you enter on these fund worksheets does populate to other sheets in the budget document, and then also uploads into the LC2.
We got a couple of questions, kind of jump in. One question, how are QC Puff bonds figured this upcoming budget year in determining tax requests for joint public hearing and the new line you just discussed on the budget document there? So the property tax excluding bond principal and interest.
So on that cover page, you'll see that the bond interest is not in the column that they're having you pick up. So the interest of bond payments are not included in that line that the form is telling you to pick up.
And bond principal and interest would also be excluded from the joint public hearing calculation as well. And that's what they're using that line for, is to do that calculation. So those are, that question's kind of one and the same as the same answer for both. They're excluded. Does the LB2 bond valuation need to be entered in the Schedule B page again, or is there a specific place for that specific valuation? You left it out again. So they're talking about the change in valuations for bond purposes, having different valuations. Is there a place on the document to enter that, or do you have to just enter that manually on Schedule B to get the correct levy?
Yeah, you have to enter it manually.
Okay, so manually, you'll have to manually enter that as well on that. And that's one of those things where some school districts have multiple bonds. And so anytime, it's really probably never going to change to just a different valuation line on the front page. It feeds back there. You'll probably always have to manually change your valuation for each of your bonds, because it does change for some districts from bond to bond.
And really important about Schedule B, we'll talk about later, is to not delete or add any lines on that Schedule B.
Good questions. Keep them coming. All right, go ahead.
Okay. All right, so we talked about entering into the budget document. So just some data entry reminders, pardon me. Make sure you're entering that correct state aid amount. So you want to make sure you're picking up that recalc amount that's at the bottom of the document. So if you have an earlier version of the state aid document, make sure you grab the most current one.
I'm going to jump in again. Sorry, this is probably one of the most common errors we see when we review a budget. A lot of people use the A1 document that lists all districts out, and that's the total amount of state aid calculated for that year. but that leaves out the prior year correction amount. So Michelle's highlighted there is from your actual certification document, not the A1. It's only your district's information. It shows, you can see barely on there, the prior year correction amount as well. So just make sure you're grabbing the right number there.
So other things to remember, make sure you're entering your motor vehicle taxes on the worksheets. Raise your arm, somebody. We haven't moved. Sorry about that. No, we're in the Stone Ages. Sorry, folks. So county treasurer balances, estimate for prior years. And then make sure you're getting some beginning and ending balances in, or enter the beginning and ending balances from your audit. Very important that those match, as Jeff was mentioning before too. So they all feed to the budget, to each budget form. So make sure when you're entering, if you put some estimates in, that you're going back and getting those corrected. Okay, so here is that budget document form. This is one of the pages. This is page 2 of 2 through 4. This is the budget you're going to adopt. So here is where I was mentioning that the state aid feeds to vehicle taxes, county treasurer amounts. When Jeff spoke about those beginning balances, you'll see the total beginning balance here. So those are the things that we do some checks on at NDE, and then also the auditor's office is doing some checking. So make sure your data entry is correct. Again, just a reminder, do not key into these pages that are labeled 2, 3, and 4. They're auto-populated, so you don't want to mess with those formulas. If for some reason you mess up a formula, don't hesitate to reach out to us or even to Jeff. We can do pretty quick. We can turn around and help you get those formulas corrected so you don't have to copy and paste into a new document. Again, just another reminder, don't mess with that Schedule B, changing or deleting or adding any lines on that one. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and she's going to give you more explanations on those exclusions and then the LC2.
Hello, I'm going to talk to you today about general fund exclusions, levy exclusions, and expenditure exclusions. These are the two types of exclusions that allow for more flexibility in your budgeting. Levy exclusions allow districts to levy more than the $5 levy limit, and no state board approval is needed. Expenditure exclusions allow districts to spend more than their certified budget authority, but most of these do need state board approval. Next slide. Expenditure exclusions that do not require state board approval are items such as special education budget. This includes your SPED transportation and your SPED related student services. This also includes special grant funds. The special grant funds list can be found in section B of the LC2. There are over 60 plus programs which are pre-approved by the state board each year. At the bottom of the special grant fund list, there is a series of exclusions that do require state board of approval. They are marked with an asterisk, and that's because these are specific to your school district. They include items such as insurance settlements, interfund loans, reimbursements for wards of the court, repayment to county governments for previous overpayments, short-term borrowing, grants from city or county government, and grants from corporations, foundations, and other private interests. A couple of things to note. On insurance settlements, consider depositing those settlements into your special building fund so that you, number one, don't have to request state board approval, but number two, anything recorded in the special building fund will not impact your per pupil cost. Interfund loans is where a general fund may loan funds to another taxing fund, but you must repay that within 2 years. Short-term borrowing, if you need a little help getting through a shortfall in revenue, but you can take out a loan from the bank, but this must be repaid within 1 year. Early childhood grants are pre-populated into the LC2 for you. They do need state board approval, and they will remain in your budget base for calculating future budget authority. New elementary site attendance. These are exclusions for costs related to your first year of operation, such as salaries, utilities, building maintenance, and you must qualify for state aid for the elementary site allowance. Schedule A is where you will find your general fund lit exclusions. This is where you will enter these at, things such as repairs to infrastructure, judgments, distance education, voluntary terminations. Here's where your retirement contributions go and your Native American impact aid. If you need to next slide. If you need to request state board approval, please send all emails to me. My email address is listed on the screen. Please provide details of the grant request, such as the name and purpose of the grant, the amount of the grant, and your district ID. These items will help me to give the correct information to the board so that they can adequately approve your request. I will submit these each month, 2 weeks before the meeting deadline. On your budget timeline, there is a list of those deadlines.
What happens if the state board hasn't approved your request yet? Can you still include it on your budget?
Absolutely, absolutely. By all means, as long as you get that request to me, you can go ahead and get that entered on your budget. All right, the LC2. This is your lid computation form. It's located in the NDE portal, and a new activation code is required each year. Instructions for how to maneuver through the LC2 can be found on the FOS website. There is a new section D this year for the Property Tax Authority, and we will go through the details of that in just a few minutes. When you're uploading your budget form to the LC2, make sure it's in Excel format. If you're a new superintendent this year, you will need to register on the NDE portal, and the phone number and advisor help desk email are listed at the bottom of your screen. All right, what's the purpose of the LC2? It confirms your budget is in compliance and does not exceed spending limitations. Error messages will appear in red if limitations are exceeded. Your special grant funds are found in Section B 110. Section B 150 calculates your unused budget authority. Our goal is to get your unused budget authority down to 0. Once the district approves your budget, once it's adopted, district approve your budget and make sure to send copies of all your supporting documents to the APA and county office, and then make sure that you're uploading your supporting documents in PDF format to NDE. Unused budget authority. Each year, when we certify your budget authority, it will pre-populate into the LC2 in Section A. If you have any unused budget authority, that will be listed there in on the left side of the screen, and you will enter that amount to the right side of the screen. Click recalculate and save, and your total allowable budget authority will appear in A780. If you need additional budget authority, like Michelle spoke about earlier, here's where you will mark that. Did you hold a special election to approve additional budget authority? If yes, an additional box will open and you will enter that amount here. Did you hold a successful election of your patrons for a levy override? If yes, additional screens will open here and you will enter that amount into your LC2. All right, here's Section D, Property Tax Authority. When you upload your budget to the LC2, your certified assessed valuation will pre-populate into the LC2 for you. Your property tax request authority will also be pre-populated in. You will start with questions such as, did 70% of the board approve to exceed the certified property tax request authority? If so, answer yes, and this will expand to answer additional questions. If you held a successful election for a successful election of the voters to exceed your property tax request authority, click yes, and additional boxes will open with that information. Once you've entered into each of these boxes, click recalculate and save at the end of your LC2, and your total property tax authority allowed will appear in box D180. Also, pre-populating from your budget forms will be your tax request for the general fund and your special building fund. D240 will pre-populate for you. It will let you know if you are within your budget, your property tax request authority, or if you have exceeded that. It will appear in red with an error message. And finally, on the section D, the last question is the last section will ask you forgive me. Total property tax reduced as a result of increased sped and foundation aid. There is a question for D310. You will need to enter an amount in this box in order to submit and approve your LC2. This can be an estimated amount.
It'll be an estimated amount. There's really no way to know that for sure. And it can be zero, can be entered in there as well. But that's a requirement in statute with LB 243 that wanted districts to identify how much property tax savings were had as a result of the additional sped and foundation aid. So it's just an estimated amount for every district.
Thank you, Bryce. All right, tips and tricks of the LC2. Make sure, again, when you're uploading your budget, it's in Excel format. Remember to recalculate and save often. When you're entering into the LC2, you will need to recalculate for the numbers to recalculate to show where you stand with your limitations. There are unlimited uploads. I would recommend checking the status of your limitations often as you're working through your budget, as you're completing funds. Save and upload to the LC2 just to verify where you stand on things. Remember that when you're entering your special grant fund list, make sure you save before returning to the LC2. And don't forget to upload your documents in PDF format after you've clicked district approval. Yes.
And will districts be allowed to manually input their budget data into the LC2 anymore?
It should not. We have asked for that, for everything to pre-populate, and you can only enter the boxes that require you to do manual entry. Anything else should be pre-populated, and it should be a static number.
So that, just noting that for everybody, that's a change. You will no longer be allowed to manually put numbers from your budget into the LC2. You will be required to upload the Excel document, as Stephanie said, into the LC2, just making sure everybody's clear on that. I think we had 95% of districts doing that already, but we had a few that didn't.
All right, LC2 error messages. You cannot submit your LC2 if there are any error messages. You will receive error messages in red if you exceed your unused budget authority, if you exceed your budget authority, if you exceed allowable reserves, property tax authority, or if your levy information and your dates don't match. Anything that does not match will appear in red, and it will not allow you to submit. If you receive an error message in red, you will need to return to your budget, make corrections, and then re-upload to the LC2. All right, checklist. Expenditure exclusions, have you sent those in? Did you use your LC2 while working on your budget to stay within your spending levy and property tax limits? Do the LC2 and the budget match? That is incredibly important. Do you need to hold a joint public hearing? Did you notify the county assessor that you needed a joint public hearing? Have you posted your notice, your hearing notice in the newspaper, and does it match your budget? Make sure we hear from school districts each year. Make sure that you confirm that your hearing notices were published in the newspaper. Reserve adequate time for public comment and budget hearing. Approve your LC2 after the board approves your budget. Make sure to submit your budget supporting documents to NDE, the Auditor of Public Accounts, and your clerk's office. Don't forget to submit your tax resolution to the county. And is your tax request set correctly? All right, finally, submitting the documents to NDE. Again, documents can only be submitted through the LC2. No paper forms or mailed documents will be accepted. They need to be uploaded to the LC2 in a single PDF document. And once this has been done, you will receive confirmation emails from us. Additionally, when Michelle and I go through and review the LC2 and budgets, once we approve, you will receive an additional confirmation email as well. All right, I'm going to turn this back over to Michelle so she can give you some end of year budget reminders.
Okay, that's all you wanted to know about 23-24, but you can't forget about the current budget year that you're in. So we recommend reviewing your current budgets to avoid overspending and or to see if an amendment is required. Guidance is if their spending authority remains in general fund, you may want to transfer to the other funds, the depreciation fund, just employee fund, school nutrition fund, or the activities fund. Unspent general fund monies will increase your 23-24 beginning general fund cash balance. So if you need to amend the current year's budget, per statute, you must amend before overspending occurs. Required if any fund will exceed total budget of disbursements and transfers out. So if your co-op fund is going over budget, you need to amend. Typically, we see nutrition fund, general fund, activity fund are usually the ones that typically will tend to go over budget. Even sometimes that special building fund, if a project costs go over what was expected. You need to have your hearing and approve that by August 31st. Just a reminder, if you increase your disbursements, your expenses, which are called requirements on the documents, then you must also balance out your total resources available. Reminder, property tax requests cannot change if the tax levy has been already set. On the right side is the required actions if you do have to amend that budget. Jeff mentioned that there's documents on their website to help you with amending. There's also documents on ours. If you need help navigating that process, don't hesitate to call myself or Stephanie and we can walk you through all of that.
Can I highlight something?
Go ahead.
So often, as you noted, the activities fund and the nutrition fund are two of the most common funds that districts have to amend a budget for. It has been my recommendation to make sure that you have lots of extra cushion built into your expenditures in those two funds. It does not cost you or does not require you to tax any additional for your school district. But it gives you the cushion. So there's just a lot of unexpected things that happen with those two funds. And again, it doesn't cost your taxpayers anything to just make sure that your expenditures have plenty of cushion built in. It just requires you to put another revenue on the other side of the formula to offset it. So it's kind of silly to have to go back and amend for those two funds, in my opinion. So just try to consider that when you're building out your budget.
Exactly. So then if you're having to transfer funds from that general fund to support those other funds, keep in mind that that could potentially cause your general fund to go over budget too. So in your planning purposes, make sure that you're building those transfers out into your general fund. Go for it as well. All right, so if the general fund depreciation or the employee fund are amended because there's the allowable reserves on those, the LC2 must be amended as well. So once you make your changes, we can help you navigate through the LC2, making changes and making sure that the purpose of the LC2, making sure you don't exceed any limitations, is still working as it should, and you haven't exceeded those. So you want to run through the LC2 before you create all your documents to amend and have your board approve. You're going to have to contact us to unlock that LC2. It will not allow you to go back and make any changes once it has been district approved. All right, so that's it on budgets. I just wanted to make a quick mention that I'm also your contact enrollment option program. Also, Kevin Lyons is available to help with that as well. No changes that we saw this year, but we do expect some changes coming potentially coming in the next year. So those documents are on our website to download. Application is updated each year around May or June. We recommend using the most current version. If you would like the Spanish version, reach out to us. I can forward those to you. Just as quick reminders that the districts retain the applications until the student graduates or reaches age 21. And there's our contact one more time. Now I'm going to throw it back over to Kevin Lyons, who is going to tell you lots of great information.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending today. Kevin Lyons talking about state aid. Coming up, the lump sum payment for the 22-23 positive prior year correction. If it's greater than $1,000 on your prior year correction, then we'll notify the districts, and then you must respond by August 15th. We'll send an email out on the 15th. Respond by August 15th if you want to take your lump sum in the September payment. If you do not want to take the lump sum, then we'll just add it to your 10 additional payments based on your certification. Less than 1,000, we automatically make that payment without an application. Next, please. Statement of change in district boundaries to annexation. Again, we will be sending out an email if your district will be requesting annexation forms. We have those available, and those need to be submitted back to me by August 20th, so I can work with the Department of Revenue on any adjustments to valuation. We had 6 schools that were involved with annexations last year. That also, the annexation may be tied to ESU 7s, depending if it's 2 different ESUs. And that will be included in annexation calculation for the core services that we just released last week. The TIOSA document, this has been updated to match the certification for June 9th. As Michelle mentioned earlier, the March 1st certification was voided through LB 583. So we updated the documents and the new certification as of July 9th. This is going to be the components of the equalization aid. It also has the new information on foundation aid as well. And again, this is available on the ND website. We did post this when we did the certification on June 9th. Consolidated data collection. Currently, we are working through instructional program hours as I'm double checking those to make sure each school district has the appropriate or the that instructional program hours submitted. I know we do have some transition with school districts from superintendents and other individuals that may have retired or moving on to another school. So we want to ensure that that's been updated. Stephanie has been working with the pupil transportation report. Her and I will do a double check of the school districts that have submitted that. I know she's been sending out emails to you as well. Again, the due date of that was June 15th, and the audit window does close on Friday. So we want to make sure that that all these reports are accurately filled in and submitted by June 30th. The consolidated data collection, again, I have the 2 listed up there as far as the days in session instructional program. The additional one I want to add is Superintendent Pay Transparency Act. This is due on or before August 1st. So if you have your current superintendent that's being retained or will continue as a superintendent for next year, please update their contract and get that submitted on the consolidated data collections. For school districts with new superintendents or superintendents changing, please again go in, get your access codes to the new school, and then get your Superintendent Pay Transparency Act completed. The one thing to note on Superintendent Pay Transparency Act is that if you don't get submitted by August 1st, you will be receiving a phone call or text messages from me. The reason is, per state statute, if you don't have it submitted by October 1st, we are required to withhold state aid payments, and we do not want to do that. So please make sure you get that taken care of. It does not take that long to get it taken care of. Future collections on the CDC. You have the summer school student unit. And I'm not going to read through each one of these, but it's important that you take time to go through them and you fill out each one. Now, some of them, for example, elementary site allowance, if it does not apply to your school district, please still log into it. And there'll be a box there where you check that you're not applying for it. And we have that option for each one of these collections that we have on the website. It just helps out so that when we do certification for the 24-25 school year, we take this information, and if there's some error there, we want to make sure that the superintendent has gone back through and looked at it. And between my programmer and myself, we do go through each one of these, and we will contact schools. Again, due October 15th. There is an audit window, but we try and notify you prior to October 15th so that we can get any corrections made. Next, please. Again, reiterating superintendent, the Pay Transparency Act, on or before August 1st, please get it submitted. Your contract, PDF it, and it goes right into the portal where you can upload. September 30th, you have Schedule D submitted with the district budget, which includes the superintendent pay as well. And as I mentioned, October 1st, per state statute, we are required to withhold state and local funds for not submitting that superintendent contract. Advisor, currently we're working on submission of your data with your school information systems to Advisor. Fall membership is due in October. The one I've been working with school districts for the past 3 weeks has been average daily membership. Now, average daily membership is due June 30th. So we want to make sure through Advisor, when we lock that data, that each school district has gone back through and reviewed your average daily membership. So far, we've been pretty good. A couple schools that we've had about 15 schools that we asked them to go back into their school information system and take a look to make sure it's accurate. The biggest changes there is if you had a lot of student mobility in your school district, whether you added students or decreased students, because that's tied into the fall membership, and then any changes that were made between October 30th and June 30th. And the ND focus on each one of these is going to be the state aid and then special education. The 23-24 recalculation, now that we've completed the certification as of June 9th, which takes your fall membership and assessed valuation, and also the 2021-22 annual financial report. Well, when we do the recalculation, the reason I emphasize the average daily membership is because that will be used on the recalculation along with your certified valuation that was sent to you the first week in October. And then any amended 21-22 annual financial reports, we utilize your amended data and we pull that over. So those 3 items are the main recalculated items that we stress that you ensure that they are correct to help you with that recalculation. Again, following up with the recalculation, again, the 23-24 certification documents are posted on our webpage. And then we go through the whole testing process again for the 23-24 recalculation, which itemizes those last 3 plus any other changes that may have been made. But since we certified on June 9th, there's not a lot of changes except for ADM amended AFRs. The local effort rate may change between the certification and the recalculation because the local effort rate is a balancing factor. So it's important to know that when you get your local effort rate, we do have that listed in the title page up top where certification is 1.0, but recalculation, that balancing effort of the local effort rate may increase or decrease a little bit depending on the recalculation numbers. Prior year correction, and we emphasize this, and I know Michelle talked about it on your certification documents. So on this situation, we take the 22-23 prior year correction that was determined from the 22-23 recalculation. And that prior year number will be utilized with the 23-24 TIOSA aid. So when we published that recalculation last fall, that prior year correction, that amount did not change with LB 583 or 243. So that number remains the same, but it will be included in the updated 23-24 TIOSA aid. LEP and poverty expenditure requirements. The 22-23 expenditure requirements were posted on the webpage. And what this does is we take the factor per state statute of 117.65% levels of expenditures. It ties into your coding, whether it's going to be LEP or poverty. Reports available are identified at the required level. And we use the assistance and I apologize there, that should be 21-22 AFR. We use that to assist us with the poverty and LEP allowances. So for 2024-2025 expenditures, you'll have the opportunity to look at our webpage and you will see the LEP and poverty expenditures. Yes.
What happens if they don't spend 117.65% of their poverty or LEP allowance?
Then the amount will be tied into LEP and poverty corrections that are done 2 years after the submission of the AFRs.
Which would be the upcoming year.
Correct.
When the TIOSA calculated this upcoming year.
Correct.
We do give you the opportunity when you submit your AFR, it's an error message that will pop up telling you that you haven't reached that percentage. So you do at that time have the opportunity to go back and change some coding before you submit the AFR, the current year's AFR that would impact it later.
Sorry, go on.
Again, this report is due in the fall. It'll be on the CD's collection page as well, where you estimate your expenditures or your expenditures for both LEP and poverty. You place that amount in there. If you don't receive either one, again, you can go back in and just put do not or click the box and then approve it and submit it. But if you do, you can do one or the other, or you can do both, depending on your school district and what you've done in the past that are tied into those two collections. 583 TIOSA changes. Wanted to mention on foundation aid in the June 9th certification. You'll notice that A1 has an additional column of formula students or foundation aid. And what we do is we take your formula students times 1,500, and that's where we get that number. And for year 1 and 2, the full amount is included in equalization calculation. However, starting 24 or 2025, 2026 for year 3 and thereafter, it's 60% of foundation aid, which will be $900 per formula students. And one thing, yes.
Did any districts lose state aid, TIOSA aid because of LD 583 this year? No.
No is the answer. But unfortunately, we had to make a correction to poverty, which caused a little change. But due to foundation aid, no.
Foundation aid only increased or had no effect on every district. Just that's a political, just making sure everybody understands that is that issue.
The other thing with 583, we take net option funding, which is basic funding per formula student per district, and we multiply that times the net positive option students for districts. However, 583 has that net option funding reduced by 1,500 per student. So it's a double calculation where we do the net option funding times the basic funding towards formula students, and then we do a reduction of $1,500 times that net positive option student. So you may see, or you may have seen a reduction from your June 9th net option funding compared to your March 1st, which was avoided.
But in total, are those districts harmed?
No.
No.
No,
They're
district,
still receiving the same amount per option student, positive option student. It's just shifted from net option funding to foundation aid.
correct. Fall membership reporting, just getting hands-on as far as you get ready for next school year. Fall school district membership is going to be reported as of October 1. So ensure any new students, current students, change over from one year to the next year is completed once you start the school year, so we can get an accurate number of your fall membership. Again, I will follow up with comparison of previous year to current year, just to ensure that your numbers are matching what you're getting submitted into the advisor. The other item is qualified early childhood education fall membership. And again, this is going to be the same for any of the 4-year-olds that you have in a qualified early childhood program at your school district. And then we pull those numbers and use that times the 60% to tie into your K-12 fall membership. Any questions you have, please, my information's up there, or contact information. The four of us work pretty hand in hand together each day with numerous emails and questions and phone calls. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.
Monitor stuff, the chat.
You want to,
Okay.
yeah, make sure. If there is one, then just let him know. Question.
All right, I am back. Going to go through a lot of information here and prepare to do it fairly quickly, but yet I want to make sure we try and do give as much information on the property tax authority as we can. I will tell you, or I guess I just have to start out with the Bryce joke. So do you know when a joke becomes, we know when a joke becomes a dad joke? When it becomes apparent. So I'm telling that one now because I can't hear any of you boo, and I'm saving the good ones for admin days. That way I don't get booed off the stage.
Bryce, we have a question that ended with mine. It deals with the added sped reimbursement, but for that question, Bryce will be going over that information. So if it doesn't get answered for you, please resend the question.
All right, well, that's a great segue. So Kevin covered the LB 583 TIOSA change, which was foundation aid. And I just want to reiterate there was no district in their state aid and TIOSA that was reduced because of LB 583. The reductions that occurred was due to a property or a poverty allowance correction that was made at the same time since we were recertifying. That was due to updating the free lunch, the year's information of free lunch counts. We put out on the model webpage, which the difference for each school district was attributed to that correction versus the LB 583 changes. So the other part to LB 583 that's important for school districts is the change to the reimbursement for excess cost school age special education reimbursement from the state. So hit the next slide here. We're going to cover that in detail. That will go into effect this December. So what's going to happen with this is state changed put language into statute that basically requires the state to reimburse at the 80% level at this moment. It would take a statute change to change that. Currently, we were at about 42% for this year on what was reimbursed for those state allowable excess cost reimbursements. That will jump up to 80%. So if you're a district trying to figure out what does that mean, how much additional aid are we going to get this upcoming school year? So those payments, just a reminder, those payments are made from December 23 through June 24. So this December, you'll start seeing the increase in special education reimbursement. How much are those going to be for our district? You would want to look at what you spent during the current school year, current fiscal year, 22-23, and what those qualifying expenditures are and take them times 80%. We obviously don't know what you spent in 22-23 yet. We won't have that information until the first part of November. When you submit your FFR and we can have an idea from the AFR, but, and we'll talk about how that all impacts later on in my part here, but just trying to get an estimate. There was a model that was put out by the governor's office where we estimated what that amount would be, but that was based off of your 21-22 expenditures that were being paid out this current year in the final financial report. So it was basically just increasing that reimbursement to 80% using 21-22, not 22-23 data, which is the most recent available data that we had at that time. For year one, for the first couple of years, the SPED reimbursement, it's going to impact both equalized and non-equalized districts the same. You're all going to get the benefit from that additional special education reimbursement. The change is in year three because special education reimbursement is an accountable receipt in the TIOSA formula. That's why foundation aid was changed in year three to only be included at 60% in the resource calculation. That way equalized districts will continue to see a benefit because the increased special education reimbursement will decrease your TIOSA in year three. All right, so obviously the most, I think, pressing thing at the top of most people's minds, at least what I'm getting questions on by far the most at the moment, is LB 243 and the impacts of the property tax authority calculation. So we need to go through that in detail. And we'll continue to provide resources around this. I know there's a lot. I think we're getting it firmed up on what it looks like and how it's going to be calculated going forward. I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago and kind of said, I think we'd hope to have a better feel by now. And I think that's coming into clarity, although there are some moving parts potentially, and I'll get into what that could be. So just a reminder, basically what LB 243 did is it created a third mechanism for limiting school district spending in our state. We already had the levy lid, the $5 that applied to the general fund and special building fund and possibly the QC puff, depending on how it's used. We also had the spending lid or budget authority, which applied to the general fund and limited how much a district could have in expenditures. And now we have a property tax authority lid. What really is confusing about this is it's property tax authority is how the language and the dialogue that's used, but in reality, it's a revenue lid. And that's what people need to look at it as and understand. I've had a lot of phone calls looking at saying, you know, I thought my property tax amount that I'm allowed is going down. Well, that is true for some, but everybody's revenue lid is going up in this calculation. So that's important to understand that and differentiate between those two things. Your revenue lid's going up, your property tax authority may be going up or down compared to last year, depending on other revenues that are calculated in that formula. So it applies only to the general fund and special building fund. Those are the only two funds that the property tax lid applies to. A lot of work was done to get that limited to only those two funds. I absolutely recognize we have issues that are going to need to be addressed in this. And I've said before, and I'll continue to say, my perception of what the take was over at the Capitol was they understood this was going to be a work in process. And I think we need to continue to work on it. I need to be aware, our team needs to be aware if there are issues you're running into that are significant, we need to know about those so we can work with them and try and get those issues fixed. I do know of a couple already and we'll continue to have those discussions. So what the revenue growth does, and that's again, going back to the revenue lid, everybody's revenue is allowed to grow. 3% is kind of your base amount of growth each year. You're also allowed, if you're growing students, to grow by your membership growth. That's a K through 12 fall membership calculation to determine that amount. Then poverty and LEP are also allowed to grow. The poverty growth is calculated using direct cert information. So that's Medicaid free and SNAP numbers that districts report. And that's through a report that's sent, I think HHS is involved in that as well. But that's where we're getting the poverty growth information. The LEP numbers are the same numbers we use for the TIOSA calculation. So that's where we're getting that information. All right, so base amount, when we do this property tax authority calculation, we have to start with the base amount or a base year of revenue. And one of the biggest challenges to calculating property tax authority was determining what year's information to use, which gets really confusing really fast. But the bottom line, or I guess the general idea that we used, was to try and use the most recent data for each of the different components. And so that meant that it was different years data for different pieces. To that point, for the base year, we used the 22-23 general and building fund property tax request off of your budget documents from last year. So that's this current year's information. It's the most recent we have available. For SPED portions of that, we use the 21-22 SPED reimbursements off of your annual financial report or AFR. The 22-23 TIOSA paid. So what you were actually paid out during this school year was the amount of TIOSA that was used. And then for other general and building fund revenues not excluded, which we'll talk about what the excluded ones are on a slide later, but does not include, it's the other things in those two funds that are counted that are not SPED and not TIOSA. And if you look at the total statewide numbers on our certification document, you'll see that this last column is really, really small compared to the top three bullets. I'm not going to say immaterial because it's not in some situations, but it's really minor compared to the other components. So we use 2021 AFR data to come up with that, which again was allowed us to use the most recent data in the upcoming year, and that would be the 21-22. So the growth then, we come up with that base amount, we then grow that to come up, and that's your total revenue for the base year is the total of those four things. We then grow that amount by the growth percentage, which is the 3% student enrollment, poverty, and LEP percentage. So for example, that may be 5% for your district. So we take that base amount, grow it by 1.05. That becomes the new year's, you can hit the next slide now. That becomes the new year's revenue cap. So for round numbers, if you used $1 million of revenue cap in that base year, we grow that by 5%. You're looking at $1,050,000 of revenue for the upcoming year. That's your new year's revenue cap, or the 23-24 revenue cap. We then back into what your property tax authority is going to be. So we start with a revenue cap. We back out the 21-22 other general fund, special building fund revenues, because that's the most recent data we have. That is where we had that survey that allowed, I think we ended up having 2 districts that adjusted those numbers for big changes they had in their districts. But 21-22 other revenue minus the 22-23 SPED reimbursements. So that was off of your final financial reports. That was as of May, which meant that we estimated that last June payment. So it may not be exact, but it's pretty close for all districts. And then 23-24 TIOSA. We know what you're going to be, what was certified on June 9th is what you're going to be paid for this upcoming year. So we back that amount out. What you're left with is the amount of property tax authority for your general and special building fund that you're allowed to tax for this upcoming year. That fortunately isn't the total that you're allowed. So they did build in LB 243 some exceptions to that amount that we're certifying to you, including the additional board approved amount. That is dependent, the amount of that, or the percentage is dependent on the size of your district. So you can see on this slide, if you're 471 students And this is average daily membership for the most recent completed year that we have, which would have been the 21-22 year that we used for that data. 7%, 6% for 472 to 3,044. And you can see up to 10,001 districts that are larger than 10,001 get 4% additional property tax authority added on. That requires a 17% board approval. So if you get that board approval, you'll be able to add that amount on, and that amount is also included on our certification document on the right side. It shows the board, your district's percentage, the additional percent allowed, and then what that is added on to the certified amount. So if you get that district amount, you can add that on there. On the LC2, Stephanie talked about how there's a column for you to add that in. We'll do a calculation and make sure that it's not more than what was certified to you. Also, they build in, if you are one of the 4 districts that has an active levy override, that amount can be added to, or that amount is added to your property tax authority. And then the last thing that can get added on there, just like your levy can be exceeded with a general public vote, and your budget authority can be exceeded with a general public vote, although those are at 50% approval or higher. You can also exceed your property tax authority with 60% approval of your district. So you have to get a higher percentage from your district. This approval or authority works similar to budget authority override in that 1 year's approval will go into your base. That means if you go out and you get $2 million additional property tax authority approval from your public, that 2 million is going to be in your base going forward, and it will be grown at the same rate the rest of your authority is grown. So it's not like you have to go out and get a $2 million if you're just hovering around 2 million additional that your district needs for property tax authority. You wouldn't have to go get that vote every year. You'd have to go get that vote in 1 year, and then that amount carries forward. If you were going to need to exceed that amount, then you'd have to go get the additional amount that you need for that year.
Question.
Okay.
Where is the money for foundation aid coming from, and how sustainable is it?
So the money for foundation aid, for a portion of foundation aid, is coming from the Education Future Fund, and as well as some of the special education reimbursement also coming, and several other things are also earmarked to be funded by the Education Future Fund, which had now I'm blanking, 750 million transferred into it this year, and requires an additional 250 million to be transferred into it each year thereafter. How sustainable is that? That's a really good question. I think there's legitimate concern that that will last for very long. I don't know that anybody's crystal ball can really put a good handle on how sustainable that is. But statute will be required to be changed before they can change those foundation aid or special education. It just means if that fund runs out, that the general fund is going to have to fund those activities at this time. Obviously, they can go in and change statute like they do it for other things, and make that change, and it may not carry forward at that time if the state can't afford it. So
One more. Does the board approved increase work the same way? Is it carried forward?
great question. We'll get to that one in just a little bit. All right. So just need to note or highlight, there are a lot of things that are not included in the revenue cap calculation, including all of your federal revenue, any of your federal grants, title, IDEA, especially ESSER. So if you're spending ESSER funds, wrapping up ESSER 2, ESSER 3, that's not going to count against your revenue cap. So don't panic on that one. Grants, donations. Again, the state does not want to discourage anybody from going out and getting grants, donations for their district. So that's not going to hurt you or your ability to tax. Bond revenue is excluded. Merged district revenue, not included. Any other funds than the general building fund. So if you're going out and you have your FFA doing fundraisers, that's not going to hurt you. Insurance proceeds, you get damage from a hailstorm, tornado, something like that, and you're getting the money coming in to replace that, it's not counted. proceeds from the sale of property. Special building fund. That is not included in the calculation. Now, notice that one says special building fund. So if you have proceeds from financing proceeds in your general fund, that does count as part of your revenue and would decrease your property tax authority. Financing proceeds, so tax anticipation notes, bond proceeds, which we already touched on, loan proceeds, those types of things are not included, would not show up, even though they're technically in a revenue account on the annual financial report, those are not counted against your property tax authority.
I have a question. How will additional sped reimbursement affect property tax authority in future years?
Good question. We'll get to that. All right, so Stephanie already covered this. The bottom line is you will have to update or upload your budget into the LC2. This is where we're going to check to make sure your property tax authority is not exceeded. This is where you're going to input if you had an override or your board granted the additional authority. You can, well, I'm going to get into this in a second. Go on. We're going to talk about the board here, and that's where, does the board approved additional amount carry forward? So these are some of the frequently asked questions we're getting. And I'm going to, when I talked a couple weeks ago, I said no. And that is not technically correct. Although I want to be really careful on this question because I want districts to understand that you may not be able to count on the board approved amount being in your base going forward. In current statute, it does say that if your board approves the additional amount, 4 to 7%, that amount will be included in your base. That's what the current statute says. I have been told that was not in the intent of the bill, and that there will be an effort to change that going forward. That will require a statute change to pull that out of the base. I don't know, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball either that says whether they'll be able to get that done or not at legislature, but it will take legislative change to pull that out. So as it stands right now, that amount will carry forward, but be warned, that could change in the upcoming legislative session. With that said, it's only going to be the amount that your board approves that will carry forward and be in your base. So if your board only approves 5% and you could have your board approve up to 7%, the 5% is what will be in the base and will carry forward, or 2% if they approve less. On the flip side, if your board approves the full 7% for your district, you're one of the smaller districts, and you don't use that full amount still carries forward. The 7% will be in your base. It will be in the unused property tax authority number that will carry forward. And unless there's legislative changes, will be in your base and will have the growth applied to that amount. So it might be wise for your district, if your board is willing, to have the language. And so one of the common questions I don't have on the FAQ yet, but need to get added, is do we have language for the board motion to approve the additional property tax authority amount? We don't. We're not legal counsel for school districts, so I don't know that we can give you language. But what I would say is it seems fairly straightforward. And what I would do possibly is, after checking with my legal counsel, as to not get myself in trouble, is to have your board authorize up to 7%, up to, if you're at 4%, up to 4%, then that amount could be entered on the LC2 and carried forward. I am not recommending the districts tax for more than they need. I think that will not politically go over well if we have districts taxing for more than they need. And that's not saying you shouldn't tax for the full amount if that's what your district needs. But I think politically, we need to be careful as a state with the additional funds coming in and not overtax if it's not required. But with that said, there's a balancing of if you don't tax for it, it may not be in your base. Well, actually, I take that back. If they will either take away that board approved additional amount or they won't, whether you tax for it or not, won't likely affect your base carrying forward. When does the board need to approve the additional amount? The board just has to approve that prior to submission of your budget. So that means prior to September 30th. I would recommend having it approved on the early side, especially I would have it approved as if I'm trying to build out a budget, it would be helpful for me to know whether my board's going to allow for that additional amount or not. So I would fill my board out or be trying to get that board approval early on. I think it's also helpful to know that before you're publishing your budget and putting it out there to know whether that's going to be in your budget or not. What if we don't tax for the full amount of our property tax authority? So one of the things that they did in LB 243 is they allowed you to carry forward unused property tax authority and you're not limited to it. I don't look for that piece to change. We had a lot of conversations with them about how budget authority works and how districts are somewhat forced to budget additional expenditures in their budgets to protect their budget authority, and how that was not obviously what we wanted districts to do with property tax requests. So I don't look for that to change. It is included in your base. It will be added to your base before the growth percentage is calculated each year. So it's not going to hurt you to have it in unused budget authority.
Is there a special form needed for board approval? If they approve, will special notification be required after they approve?
So there's no special form needed for board approval. I think I touched on that. And nothing will need to be published, but you will need to include in your budget documents your board motion and the board minutes showing the approval of the additional property tax authority amount and the 70% approval.
Maybe we ask the SPED people, but is it not possible now for there to be specific instances of MOE difficulty with the increase in reimbursement? And are there going to be expanded exceptions for the initial years?
So the answer to the MOE question on SPED is really complex and it can't be answered at a statewide level. For most instances, most districts will be fine on MOE because it looks at both state and local contributions. But there are exceptions to that and how states have calculated MOE or their base amount. And so if you're concerned about your district situation with MOE, I would highly recommend that you talk to the SPED team on that. And they're going to have to look at it on a district by district basis. And they are concerned there'll be a couple of instances where that's an issue based on what districts have elected to do in the past. But for most districts, it will not be an issue because the state picking up the portion does count towards that MOE requirement. Any other questions right now?
No.
Okay, well, that's what I have on the property tax authority piece. I do want to touch real quickly on LB 644 again. Again, just reminding people, property tax authority does not eliminate the joint public hearings, unfortunately. So those are still going on. There were tweaks to what those look like in LB 727. They changed the dates of the public hearing. I think Jeff touched on this stuff and when that information must be sent to the county clerk. The other big change is that an elected official must attend the joint public hearing now. So that just means, I guess, your board gets to be in on the fun as well. What I think is really critical on LB 644, you know, when you look back at how did year one go? I know that it was rough for some of the districts. It depended on the counties. Some counties really had, really ran their joint public hearings well. And it wasn't terrible. I'm going to say terrible for school districts attending. And other counties, that just wasn't the case. It was not pleasant. And some of what contributed to that was there were several counties that messed up the mailing. I think number one, what I would recommend going forward is working with your county to make sure that you can check the mailing prior to it being sent out to make sure that any errors are corrected before it goes to print. I think that would avoid a lot of headaches in several school districts that I heard about. Number two, I think you have to be prepared to explain to your public or on the angry phone calls or emails that you get the difference between an increased property tax request or levy increase and a valuation increase for a district. It happened in some districts where the property tax request stayed exactly flat, but certain people in that district had 20-40% valuation increases. And so obviously their property tax portion went up significantly and looked really bad on that mailing. That's the piece that you have to be prepared to explain. And unfortunately, none of LB 644 does that well. It really highlights and makes it look like a school district's fault when valuation change occurred. And that's an unfortunate side effect of that. But I think it's just something you're going to have to be ready to explain at those hearings or even just to your public as they come with questions and possibly aren't very happy. Okay. Another special education piece that we need to talk about was a bill passed this session that allows districts that have a large increase in special education costs. When SPED is 0.5% of your annual budget and you're spending over 50,000 annually on SPED, if that increases over 7% from September 1 to December 31st from what you spent the prior year, you're going to qualify. You can qualify to request early reimbursement for that amount. And basically what we'll do is give you a payment for half of that additional amount by January 31st. There's going to be a new process for this. And then quite honestly, we haven't designed that yet. It will need to be in place fairly soon. It does not additional SPED payments for your district. I think it's really important for people to understand that it doesn't mean you're going to get more SPED funding. It's just it's an expedited amount if you're in a budget cash flow crunch. So that amount that you're paid out early will be an accountable receipt and will reduce your final financial report or final financial amount paid SPED payments the following year. Couple of things just to highlight with the annual financial report. I think there's always a few things. This is just obviously critical to a lot of the different things that flow through us and out to school districts ultimately in aid, and also what the public sees in school spending. We continue to have a decent amount of amendments to our annual financial reports. Number one issue is maintenance of effort. And I only expect that to become a bigger issue this year with the increase in special education. I think it's really important to note, and I'm gonna highlight it again in another slide, but we have built into into your annual financial report reports that will help you understand what is the maximum amount that can be requested on your final financial report. Also, what are your maintenance of effort amounts going to be? I know that the special education team has also built MOE spreadsheets or has built out spreadsheets that will help you determine your maintenance of effort requirements on their SPED finance page. Greg Prokaska is the expert in that area, and I'm sure would be glad to help answer any of those questions. Another big area, 600 versus 700s. And this is really with the ESSER funds primarily where we see these issues popping up. So if you're requesting reimbursement and have budgeted in one area and coded in another area, that's where we're seeing that issue pop up. And then just remembering that if you're coding more sped expenditures to federal accounts than you're getting in revenues, you're hurting your reimbursement from the state possibly. If it's early childhood, then not necessarily, but it's just a good practice to not code more expenses to any federal grant than what you're getting reimbursed, because a lot of times that amount flows into your state aid or into your general fund operating expenditure if it's coded into local codes. The final user's manual and master code lists are available now, and so is the test site. Michelle and Stephanie have done a great job of getting that information out to you guys earlier, and we continue to do that sooner each year. The key, what I want you to know is make sure you're uploading your annual financial report and have checked your codes. We don't want school districts getting to October and slowing up their audits, running into issues trying to get their annual financial report submitted to us because you haven't checked your codes. You can have that all done now. That test upload site now only verifies that you're using the right codes. It doesn't check everything else. All the other validations and error messages will have to be checked in October. I'll talk about that in a second, but you can have the account codes knocked out now. Just a reminder, the value of building and contents that you're entering into the annual financial report when you submit that is critical to your per pupil cost calculations. And that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue for all districts. It's 3% of those totals is added, just like we do for expenditures. If you code to the district level, it gets allocated out to each building based on average daily membership. If you have building amounts, those obviously should be put to the specific building, but there are instances where it should be coded to district. If it's a district-wide bus barn or administration building, those types of things should be coded specifically to the district level. Just a good reminder, it's still important, the district's code as much out to the building level for per pupil cost purposes that you can. If you can identify expenses that should go to a specific building, then they need to be coded there. At times that's not possible, or it's also possible that the most accurate allocation is to code it to the district level and have it allocated out by average daily membership. That's perfectly acceptable, but districts can use their own methods too. And there's a lot of reasons that should be coded or can be coded to building levels versus district level, and why we've left schools the flexibility to do that, how they see most fit. But we also have auditors check that to make sure that what you're doing makes sense. Just a reminder that AFR system will open October 1st, just like it has in the past. When the day that opens, the test portal closes, you can upload as many times as needed into the AFR system. And I highly recommend uploading preliminary information, even if it's not final. Even if your auditor's not done, you can start getting in all your building contents, your beginning balances. Those types of things will carry over as you upload. You won't have to re-enter all that information. And you can start to check some of the validations and errors and see if some of them can be fixed before you get your final version. It'll create a lot less stress for your auditors and you at the end of the day. Again, just noting, when you start uploading, you're going to have the opportunity and you're going to be required to put in your building and contents. You can get these pieces knocked out if you start with an early kind of trial balance or early version of your AFR and get some of that stuff knocked out. Once you've done that, you can also get into the reports section. Again, SPED is huge. I think making sure that you've checked MOE and that report, making sure that you've checked what you can, now that you're getting reimbursed 80% this upcoming year for your SPED expenditures that are FFR eligible. Checking that report, making sure that looks reasonable is more important than ever. The NEP, what are we going to put out on for the public to see your per pupil cost per building. I would want to check and make sure that that's accurate. We have a report built in there that matches up to your audit. That has to be checked. If it's not, if those two don't match, you're going to be doing it again and you're going to have to re-upload and go through the process again. So you have to check that report and make sure it ties out to your audit when you have your audit available. That's one of those things you can't do early if you don't have your audit done. But we need the auditor and you working together. We can make sure that you're having your auditor submit the supplemental schedule that's required in Rule 1 in the format that matches that report. We've built those to match so that you can tick and tie, the auditor can tick and tie, and we can when we're verifying that what you're submitting matches your audit. So on the audit subject, just remember, those are primarily done at the district level. So auditors aren't going to go in and dig and do a ton on the building allocations, but we do require some testing there to make sure that what's being done is reasonable. And they're required to submit a statement to that point as well, just similar to what they do with average daily membership. And go to the next one. Again, this really applies more to the smaller districts across our state, but it is critical that you have somebody capable of overseeing the financial statement preparation process. We understand that for a lot of districts, your auditor is the one that puts your financial statements together and then what's being audited. So it doesn't mean that you have to have somebody that can do it in your district, but you have to have somebody that's can read those financial statements and understand if something looks out of line. At minimum, can look at a balance sheet and say, whoa, that doesn't match or doesn't make sense, or our income statement doesn't look right. We should have more revenue or less revenue or more expenditure, something like that. So if you don't have somebody that's capable of doing that, you should have separate audit firms prepare your financial statements and do the audit. That's a challenge right now. We understand the challenge of finding auditors, continuing to have conversations about ways to address that issue. And it may mean that you're going out and having to pay more for your audit. Unfortunately, it might be a situation where you're going to have to entice an audit firm to take on something they haven't done in the past, or an audit firm to hire more staff. They may have to become financially beneficial to them for them to do that. So we keep getting word more firms are not doing school district audits. So that's a challenge. We're looking at changing a school's fiscal year. That's been a request by audit firms to make it easier to go to a July 1st to June 30. I also like the idea of instead of schools having to deal with 3 fiscal years and that yours run September 1 to August 31st, and the federal fiscal year, October 1 to September 30th, and the states being July 1 to June 30th, that kind of creates confusion. So just know that we're looking at some of those things. You want to read it?
Yes. What is the consequence if you exceed your spending authority?
If you exceed your spending authority, your board can be on the hook for that additional spending that's outside of what you were legally allowed to do. So that's you don't want to do that. If you're exceeding what was budgeted, your approved budget that was passed and allows you to spend, again, year one, usually from the auditors, you kind of get a letter that says, hey, you exceeded your authority. You legally can't do that. It's kind of a warning. It gets more severe from there. So I definitely would recommend not doing that. You may have to amend your budget. If you are going to exceed what is allowed in budget authority, then we have a bigger issue on hand, and not a good situation. So that would require, we need to be sitting down and having a conversation now. Federal funds overview, just a reminder, CARES Act, we are done with. Second round, Carissa, is those obligations are due this September 23. Continue to have Davis-Bacon issues on that. There will be a presentation out at Administrator Days on Davis-Bacon requirements by our fiscal monitoring team and federal programs team. The There's a possibility of allowing for payment extensions, so it has to be obligated prior to September 30th of this year for that round. But spent before December of that year. They have said that they may allow payment extensions for certain situations. They have never really given us any examples of what those are. It sounds like it's construction related if you can't get materials, those types of things. But it is really unclear, and I wouldn't count on that. So I guess just know that that's an issue. The last round ARP is due September 30th, 2024. So we're looking at about a year and a couple of months that you have to get that one wrapped up and spent as well. So same situation there. Davis-Bacon is an issue if you're using it for construction, and our fiscal monitoring team has found quite a few issues with that. So just a quick reminder, if you're taking indirect costs on any federal grants or any grant, you need to apply the same rate to all grants, federal and non-federal grants, unless they have a different rate that's allowed that's less. So the process now, you can choose to elect prior to the end of May, a rate that is less than the max. You just have to notify us if you want to do that. So that has been finalized for this upcoming year and will be in the GMS system. I think we've hit on this quite a few times, but indirect cost rates, when we certify those, and especially in ESUs, it looks like we continue to have coding to the 2500s that is for technology purchases for instructional purposes or for students. Technology, 2500 should only be for administrative or general operation of the district. So any technology that's for learning should go to the 2200s, and that will help fix some of the high indirect cost rates. Also, if you have subawards for federal grants, the first 25,000 is coded to 395. Anything over that is coded to 396 and is excluded from the indirect cost calculation. So just want to highlight real quick, the ESSA consolidated app will be similar to prior years. It's opening July 18th, so coming right up. Closing date is September 29th. Couple of things there. Federal programs team is doing a couple of things to try and make themselves available and helpful to you. One, if you're a new SOUP or business manager coming on board, they will be this year with us at new SOUP orientation in North Platte and Milford. So bring your information for that. And if you're not sure what to bring, contact Beth, Dottie, Kirk, or anybody on that team, and they can tell you what would be helpful to take with you, so that we have the afternoons to work on that and your budget and anything else, other fun finance stuff you want to work on. We're glad to help with that. They'll also have a room right next to ours, like they have the last several years, for budget assistance at admin days. So just the fiscal monitoring team, just a reminder, most common error far and away is time and effort logs. If you have employees that are being paid with federal funds and they're working on more than one, but with one funding source, you need to have a time and effort log for them. That far and away is the most common issue that we get wrote up on, because districts aren't doing it, and most common error that they're finding as well. The second is easily make sure that your policies and procedures are in place for grants. Districts are required to have that, and make sure if you're questioning whether it has all the required pieces to it, run that by our fiscal monitoring team. So, and then coding issues, I think that there'll always be a few here or there on that one. Census collection is opening and requires you to submit by July 10th. There is an audit window, July 11th through 12th. It is your census count of 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds in your district. It's in CDC. If you have questions on that, contact Michelle, Stephanie too, right? Yeah, I think you're.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So Steph and I do review the entries, what is submitted. And typically we're calling and checking with districts if it's 20% less or more. So use that kind of as your margin. If you're seeing that percentage difference, we added that a couple years ago. That's your alert that you want to dig down into those numbers and find out why there might be the difference. This census collection is used for payments for county fines and license and for the apportion payment. So really important that it's usually $100, $110 per person or per child. So it could potentially be a big dollar amount that you may lose out if you don't get the correct information entered.
Just kind of an FYI, in case your exempt school parents are wondering if you're talking any communication with them, we are trying to open up a new exempt school system that I'm confident will be better once it's fully implemented, but we are struggling to get that out. Hopefully by the end of this week, it should be rolled out for those folks. We'll have the system available to give you your district information so that you can follow or track those kids and make sure they're filing probably August, September timeframe. Just a reminder, since it is budget season, I know at least one person has told me it's like their third favorite time of the year behind Christmas and football season. That's a superintendent, or maybe he won't admit to it, but we will be doing the new SOUP orientation, which is really strongly focused around, it's not only, but we focus a lot on the budget. It's really the first big thing you got to do as a superintendent or a business manager. We'll be in North Platte on July 18th from 8:30 to 3. The morning is really classroom type activity. And then after we'll break quick for lunch and come back. We'll spend the afternoon just one-on-one type help. We'll walk around, sit with you, go through your budget. If you're, anybody's welcome to that. We typically send out invites to first and second year SOUPs and business managers, but all are welcome to attend. But if it is something where you can start a budget, it's always a little more helpful. Or if you have no idea where to start, that's great too. We'll get you started and maybe send you home with a homework assignment, and then we'll get you again at administrator days. We've done that with a lot of people. But if you're just a district that's around those locations and you want to stop in for some budget help, that's always welcome too. Just come in for the afternoon. That's great. We'll be in Milford on July 20th. So those are Tuesdays and Thursdays, the week before admin days. So pretty typical time frame there. And we're at ESU 6 in Milford. So budget assistance out at administrator days. We'll be out there on Wednesday and Thursday. They always put us upstairs, kind of, you always want to hide your accountants a little bit. You don't want them out in the public, in the wild too much. But we'll be out at administrator days up in the second floor. I don't know the exact room yet, but I'm sure you can find us 8 till 4. And it says we'll take a break for lunch. Sometimes we run out and grab lunch real quick, but we'll try and be in there as much as possible from that time frame on Wednesday and Thursday. Sometimes we jump out a little early on Thursday if it's slow. But also, you hit the next slide. We are always, the four of us are more than glad to provide any other kind of assistance that we can. A lot of you just like to email in your budgets, let us take a look at them. That works really well. We can go through your budgets, check for any issues. And then, if you want to do a follow-up phone call, Zoom meeting, any of that stuff works. Some of you like in person, we can do that. It's nice that we have an office and a place that we can meet with you now. So feel free to set that up. So any way that we can help you, we're more than glad to do. Just know that that's the case. Our contact information there. Obviously, I'll tell you to follow me on Twitter.
How many people are you up to now? Million? Yeah.
Some people have said I'm similar to the Kardashians in followers, but I don't know that that's accurate. So, but I do have, if you haven't figured it out, have a fun sense of humor, at least. Maybe it's not fun. Maybe it's just corny. So anyway, that's our contact information. Any other questions we can answer before we jump off here? We are recording this and we'll make the recording available as soon as possible on the webinar site.
No more questions unless.
Okay, we'll stay on for a minute or two here to see if there's any more questions that pop up.
There's a couple direct questions on your personal computer.
Okay. You want to run up there and read them?
We tried, it's locked.
Oh, it's not just online. Sounds like we have a couple other questions here. I'm gonna see if I can.
Yeah, I think that's what.
All right. We will look forward to seeing you all at Administrator Days, if not before.